Hi, you guys. This is Richard Sachs. I'm your host on Lost Arts Radio. Thanks for being here again. I appreciate it. And another fantastic guest today, a friend of ours, Paul Connett, Dr. Paul Connett, who was on the show back in 2015, I believe, on Lost Arts Radio. And we had a great talk then, and that was just getting into the fluoride issue and Fluoride Action Network, his organization. We haven't had a chance to get up to date about that at all since that time more than 4 years ago. So it was a wonderful opportunity to do that. And I really was telling Paul that I want to include people that are not necessarily familiar with why the fluoride issue matters. What are the elements of it? What, is it good or bad? What's the impact on our lives? Why are all these people doing organizations and spending all this time and effort on it? And why are the government agencies saying it's so wonderful for keeping your general health and your mouth healthy and all these other great benefits that you get out of it? How can you make sense of that? So I thought the best way is to get Paul back to explain it all himself and give us a chance to talk. And so I'm really looking forward to our discussion. And thanks for being here, Paul. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on, Richard. I look forward to it.
Should be fun. So let's start. If people who are already familiar will forgive us because they understand we need to bring new people to this subject up to speed as quickly as possible. Let's go back to where you didn't know anything about fluoride and just quickly step through the points up to where you thought it may be an important issue and what you decided to do about it. And then we'll get into what's happening now.
Okay, well, Richard, I'm a retired professor of chemistry, and the key date that you're asking here is 1996. July of 1996 is when my wife came to me with a bunch of papers, put them on my desk, and said, "Dear, would you read these?" And she gave me a cup of tea at the same time. I should have been suspicious, but yeah. I did. I said, "Well, what is it all about?" She says, "It's fluoridation." I said, "Take those papers away. These people are crazy."
Yeah, that's a conspiracy theory.
Yeah, I had fallen victim of this prevailing dogma that the people that, one, that fluoridation is safe and effective, and the people opposed to fluoridation are a bunch of Looney Tunes, Flat Earth Society. Yeah. And I'd fallen for that. Now, I should preface this by saying I've been an activist for a long time. Long before I was a chemistry professor, I was involved in the Vietnam peace movement with Biafra, with Bangladesh, with India, and a few other things. And then eventually in the 70s with the anti-nuclear campaign. But I settled down, if you like, in the 1979, coming back to the United States, and I got a PhD at Dartmouth and went to St. Lawrence University for the quiet life. I thought I was going to teach at a small liberal arts college, chemistry. The nearest building was the public radio station, and I'd already done a program on classical music for Vermont Public Radio. And so this looked like a very nice lifestyle, low pressure teaching, not too much heavy duty research, watch my kids play baseball and prefer them to play cricket, but they don't play much cricket up there in northern New York, in Canton, New York.
Right.
But a year and a half into this scenario of the peaceful life, having done my activist duty, I was overtaken by the waste issue. They wanted to build an incinerator, a trash incinerator in our county, northern New York, St. Lawrence County. And at first I thought that was a good idea until I read Dr. Barry Commoner on this issue. And before I knew what was happening, it took over my life. Fighting this local incinerator, being a professor of chemistry, I was being invited by all kinds of other communities around the United States and Canada. Could I help them fight other incinerator proposals? And to cut a long story short, between 85 and 95, my wife and I, with a group called Work on Waste USA, helped communities stop the building of over 300 trash incinerators.
Wow.
And then after that, they only built one incinerator in the United States since 1997. So this was the cusp when Ellen, my wife, brought me this this paper, this fluoridation issue.
And the incinerator thing was all to cut down air pollution, right?
Right. Incineration was a way of getting rid of trash. The way they sell it is it's waste to energy. Not only do we get rid of your waste, but when we burn it, we use the heat to produce steam, to produce electricity. It's a win-win situation. Actually, it's a lose-lose situation because it's bad for the local environment. It's bad for public health with the acid gases, the dioxins, the furans, and toxic metals. Number two, you've got to get rid of the ash. 25% of your trash ends up as toxic ash, so you still need landfills. And the whole business of creating energy, they're actually a waste of energy because far more energy, at least 4 times more energy, is actually saved in the second cycle if you reuse, recycle, or compost. Anyway, so after about in the early 1990s, I started to go to other countries fighting incineration, big tours. I've been to now 67 different countries fighting incineration. Now, why is all this important? Well, I'm trying to explain that in 1996, I didn't want another issue. I was already busy teaching chemistry full-time and also fighting, traveling everywhere under the sun on waste management, fighting incineration, promoting the alternatives, which eventually morphed into the zero waste proposal. Okay. So one, I didn't have the time, and two, I didn't want to be stigmatized in this way as being another Looney Tune.
Right.
When I read that afternoon in July of 1996, when I read those papers, I was absolutely shocked. First of all, I was cleared of the illusion that the opponents of fluoridation had confused fluorine, the gas, fluorine, the element, which is the most reactive chemical on the earth, practically. It reacts with everything. And fluoride, what it becomes when it reacts with metals mainly. If sodium reacts with fluorine, you get sodium fluoride. So there is a little bit of chemistry. When elements combine, their properties change dramatically. So while sodium is a reactive metal and chlorine is a very reactive gas, when they come together, they form common salt. You can eat it. You put it on potatoes. So, and I thought that those poor anti-fluoridation people had confused the element fluorine with the compound fluoride. But then I discovered.
Let me just ask you to be clear on that. Yeah. You thought that they confused elemental fluorine with what fluoride compound? Sodium fluoride?
Yes, sodium fluoride. Yeah, any fluoride. Basically, when you form an ionic compound between a metal and a non-metal, they form positive ions, and the non-metals form negative ions. And once they're in solution, they go their separate ways. So a solution of sodium fluoride or sodium chloride is essentially 2 chemicals. It's a solution of sodium ions in solution and fluoride ions in solution, or chloride ions in solution, whatever you're looking at. These ions go their separate way. And that, incidentally, is why when you see the components in bottled water, if you're in Canada or in Europe, they give you the list of the minerals in the water. They never list compounds. They only list the separate ions. So they'll list the concentration, sodium ions, potassium ions, calcium, magnesium, and they'll list carbonate, nitrate, chloride, fluoride, and so on. Because once they're in solution, they no longer, quote, remember which compound they came from. Water goes through the soil, it dissolves certain rocks, and when those rocks and the minerals in those rocks go into water, they separate into separate ions. We're not usually dealing with compounds in water, but separate ions. And the difference between ions and atoms is that the ions are charged. They've either gained or lost electrons. Anyway.
Okay.
So that was important. And the second thing was that fluoride, whilst it is not reactive from a chemical point of view, is extremely active from a biological point of view. It does 2 things which are very damaging to biology. Number one, it forms complex ions with every other metal ion in the periodic table except sodium, potassium, that group 1. So, and these complexes have different properties and cause a lot of problems. So in other words, when fluoride goes into the body, it seeks out calcium, it seeks out magnesium, it seeks out a lot of ions which are doing very important things in biology. That's what makes it dangerous. The second thing it does is it forms a hydrogen bond. And biology is structured, both the function and structure of biology is around hydrogen bonds. Hydrogen bonds hold DNA together. Hydrogen bonds give the shape and structure of proteins. And when enzymes are active, it's the making or breaking of hydrogen bonds, which is so critical for the catalytic properties of these proteins, which we call enzymes. So when I saw that, my main training has been in biochemistry, I was absolutely shocked. I mean, this is crazy. You're putting deliberately into the drinking water something that's going to interfere with enzymes, interfere with hydrogen bonds. This is crazy. And then when I started to read, I found that the first opponents of fluoridation in the United States, going back to the 1950s, were enzyme chemists, were biochemists, people like James Sumner at Cornell University, who got the Nobel Prize for enzyme chemistry. At Cornell said, don't do it. Don't put fluoride into water because it interferes with enzymes. You're going to poison people. Right. Now, it's taken a long time to prove his concerns were right. We knew right away from the test tubes that fluoride interfered with enzymes. That was not. But what the ramifications were to health are only now beginning to emerge. Just in the last few years, we're getting very, very serious medical evidence that fluoride is a very serious problem. But there was another clue, Richard, which I think I'm very keen on evolution, the chemical changes in evolution, what nature does. Now, some of the proponents of fluoridation say, don't worry about fluoride. It's a natural substance. It's naturally in the water. But that doesn't make it safe, Richard. Arsenic is naturally present in some water supplies. It doesn't make it safe. Mm-hmm. And people are spending millions of dollars in some states getting arsenic out of the water. Now, when they say natural, actually, they're confusing geology with biology. It's natural in the sense that when water flows through rocks, it dissolves ions. And if fluoride is in those minerals, that some of the fluoride will come out into the water. In that sense, it's natural. But you're talking geology. The rocks came before biology. Look at what biology has what has done with fluoride. What we've found, starting in 2012 with work from Yale University, what we're finding is that lower creatures like bacteria and fungi and some plants have developed a defense against fluoride. The fluoride, when it builds up in the tissues of these small creatures, switches on proteins, switches on genes which produce proteins which pump fluoride out of the water. These proteins go to the membrane and literally pump fluoride out of the water. What does that tell you? It tells you that nature knew that fluoride was incompatible with the basic biochemistry of the cell. It has to get rid of it. Now,
and so they can do that, but humans cannot?
Well, you see, by the time you get to the humans in evolution, we've developed a thing called kidneys. And the kidneys pump out most of the fluoride in our water. So if you take an adult, approximately 50% of the fluoride that we ingest each day from all sources, toothpaste, water, food, pesticides, and so on, is removed from our body quickly. The first run through the kidney is taken out of the blood and into our urine and out of the body. That's a defense mechanism. What happens to the rest? Almost immediately, the rest of the fluoride in the bloodstream is taken up by the bones, the hard tissues. Again, that attraction that fluoride has from calcium, it goes to the bones. And I see that as a defense mechanism. Some promoters of fluoride think that this is good for us. It hardens the teeth. It hardens the bones, they say. But really what is happening is it's poisoning the teeth and it's poisoning the bones. And we now talk about dental fluorosis, which is this mottling of the teeth, marking of the teeth, discoloration of the teeth. That is poisoning of the enamel or the growing teeth with fluoride, and skeletal fluorosis, where you get poisoning of the bones. And the first symptoms of fluoride's poisoning of the bones is stiffness and pains in the joints and pains in the bones. It's the first symptoms of fluoride's poisoning of bones, and those are identical to the symptoms of arthritis.
Yeah, they don't call it fluoriditis, they call it arthritis, right? So there's no official connection.
No, and that's the trouble. Once the U.S. Public Health Service had endorsed fluoridation in 1950, before any trials had been completed, before there was anything seriously done on studying the long-term or even the short-term health effects of fluoride, the U.S. Public Health Service endorsed fluoridation. Incredible. And as a result of that endorsement, it locked official dentistry and public health into this practice. And as endorsers, this is a good thing. And they've been trying to maintain that it's been a good thing ever since. For 70 odd years, fluoridation is supposed to be safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective. And that's the mantra which is played out on public platforms and in the media throughout.
So this was like 1950 that they approved it?
1950 is when it was officially endorsed. But the trouble with that is once the U.S. Public Health Services had endorsed it, there wasn't much interest in finding out what harm it was doing. There was no harm.
Right.
A belief. There was no harm. The interest was on proving that it was really working very well, was effective. So most of the research until recently has been focused on teeth, on dental caries, and on dental fluorosis.
So at this point, since it's been a few years and you've been working with this for a long time, what's your feeling now about why it was endorsed when nobody knew it was safe?
Well, there's several hypotheses here. I mean, Christopher Bryson, a former BBC producer, spent 10 years writing a book called The Fluoride Deception. It's a wonderful book. In fact, it's two books. There's the narrative, and then there are the footnotes, which is a second book in itself, a brilliant book. And he showed the collusion between the U.S. Public Health Service and the Fluorine Lawyers Association. And the Fluorine Lawyers Association only had one purpose in life, and that was protect industry from lawsuits pertaining to fluoride. Industry was worried about the poisoning of their own workers and the poisoning of the environment around plants like aluminum smelters, phosphate fertilizer plants, metal smelters, zinc, steel, and so on. There's a huge amount of industries which are producing fluoride pollution. And there were more lawsuits. There were more lawsuits in the 1950s on fluoride pollution than any other air pollutant, number one. And number two, so you can read that thesis from Chris Bryson. Basically, he sees fluoridation as a way of changing the image of fluoride as one of the worst air pollutants that had done more damage to agriculture. According to the Department of Agriculture, fluoride has done more damage to agriculture than any other air pollutant. So it was a way of changing the image from this nasty air pollutant to something which was actually good for your children's teeth.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Finish.
The other economic driver here is the sugar lobby. The sugar lobby in 1949, this is 1 year before that mysterious endorsement by the U.S. Public Health Service, the sugar lobby wrote in its magazine called The Sugar Molecule. They said, we need to find a way to reduce tooth decay without reducing sugar consumption.
Right.
And since that day, and then they funded various researchers like Fred Stair at Harvard University and other nutritional departments to do two things: promote sugar as a nutrient and promote fluoride as a beneficial substance that could be used to fight tooth decay.
So they didn't really need it to be true that fluoride did anything beneficial. They just needed to say so, because if people would believe it, then they would keep using the sugar.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was a huge distraction, and the sugar lobby has continued to play this role for 70 years. And if you think of how much damage sugar has done to the health of children, let alone their teeth, but to the health of their children, they have a lot to answer for. I mean, they increase the sales of sugar and everything, from cookies to candies to everything, cakes and so on. And at the same time, pretending that there was this protection there from fluoride.
So the Fluorine Lawyers Association was to protect the image of fluoride as something good, right?
Well, they were protecting industry from lawsuits, period. And the lawsuits, which were very apparent in the 1950s, were from farmers whose agricultural products were being damaged by fluoride. The fluoride settles on the grass, and then the cows eat the grass, and then they come down with skeletal fluorosis. Literally, there are videotapes from the 50s where you see cows on their knees and drinking water like dogs because their teeth are rotted to the gums, and the water was very painful when they drank it. So they lapped the water like a dog with the tongue going crosswise. Very, very heartbreaking shots of these animals. So those were lawsuits. Actually, small potatoes individually on a farmer, I mean, they could buy off these farmers for 30, 40,000. But what they were more concerned about was those lawsuits in the offing from their own workers who, with a career-long exposure to fluoride, would probably at least have arthritis and probably have bone damage and crippling. And they usually get rid of them before the big symptoms show up.
So it sounds, I mean, I tend to go looking for causes for things during a discussion, and it sounds like what you're describing is the willingness of associations and legal people and medical groups and things like that to just endorse something they know is harmful if there's something they'll get out of it.
Okay, now let me back off of that just a little bit. I think you've got an interweaving of two different sets of people. I think you've got poorly informed dentists and doctors who are not taught both sides of this debate. Doctors are not told about fluoride toxicity when they're in medical school. Right. They don't get much toxicology anyway, and they don't get much nutrition. And dental students are only taught one side of the fluoridation debate. They are taught that fluoridation is safe and effective, and the only people opposed to fluoridation are Looney Tunes. That's what they're basically taught. Okay. And once they've left dental school and medical school, they're so busy in their practices that they don't have time to read the literature. So you've got this mixture of true believers and people with economic and self-interest involved. And so these two things have gone forward almost hand in hand through the many, many years.
So what you're describing is an so-called educational system, which is really a memorization system.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
you know, they're not learning that fluoride is good. They're memorizing that it's good or safe. Right, and there is a difference, and it seems like that distinction has been forgotten.
Yeah, that's why I think it's so important for scientists in particular, though not at dental school and not in medical school, scientists and particularly chemists, for goodness sake, look at the literature, read this business, look at these defense mechanisms that nature has developed. And one defense mechanism which struck me very powerfully in 1996 was mother's milk. Where would you expect, if fluoride was good for the developing baby, where would you expect to find fluoride? In mother's milk, mother's breast milk. You would expect that's where it would be.
Sure, it would help everything.
First meal. But when you look at the levels, they're 200 times less than we put into drinking water. Or to put it another way, a bucket-fed baby in a fluoridated community in the United States is getting approximately 200 times more fluoride than a breastfed baby, or 200 times more fluoride than nature intended for the baby. That, to me, should have been it. When people discovered that or read that, they should have said, stop it, stop it. Nature has this defense mechanism, and we're bypassing it. And in fact, now the latest science suggests it is worse. And let me put this in a very simple fashion, Richard, because I think everybody understands this intuitively. You know that for any toxic substance, let's take a drug, let's take aspirin. You know that you can't give the same dose of aspirin to a child that you would give to an adult.
Right.
Okay. So the toxicity depends not only on the substance, but the age, or put it another way, the body weight of the recipient. And so for the same dose of fluoride, if we take a dose of milligrams of fluoride per day, let's say 1 milligram of fluoride per day, you can assume that 1 milligram per day of fluoride is going to be worse for the child than for the adult. And then, by the same token, worse for the baby than the child. Right. And now, the real killer, it's worse for the fetus than the baby. Yeah. Yeah. And the latest science which was researched 12 years, U.S. government-funded science done by top people, done in Mexico City, shows a very strong relationship between the amount of fluoride that a pregnant woman is exposed to and the lowered IQ of her offspring. A very good study where they measured on an individual basis the level of fluoride in the mother's urine, which is a measure of total dose, regardless of source, whether you get fluoride from water or food or salts or whatever. The total dose is a measure would be the fluoride levels in the mother's urine. And there's a strong relationship. The higher that level in the mother's urine, the lower the IQ of the child that is born. So individual measurements of the pregnant women and individual measurements of the offspring. Mother-child pairs were studied. And a very, very striking study. And that was published in September of 2017. And this is why you're important, Richard, because that study was not covered by the New York Times. It was not covered by the Washington Post. Most people do not understand, have any idea that this dramatic thing has happened. They have no idea why we are going almost berserk trying to tell pregnant women, don't use fluoridated toothpaste, don't drink fluoridated water, and no one, Richard, will help us get this information out. It's only the internet and social media, by and large, and a handful of media journalists like yourself that are not tied to whatever, who get this message out. That's why it's so important. Now, when this study came out, they said, the promoters said, well, that's just Mexico City. There's not a problem for Canada or the United States. Not relevant, they said. Well, within a few weeks, there was a study done in Canada which showed that the urine fluoride levels in the urine of pregnant women in Canada were twice as high in the fluoridated communities as non-fluoridated communities in Canada. And in the average in the fluoridated communities was almost identical to the levels in Mexico City. So different sources, but more or less the same level. 0.87 parts per million in Canada, average. In Mexico City, 0.91. So there is no difference. And there are other studies which have been published which are also important. The same study. The author was Bashash, that's his name, Bashash, from the University of Toronto. A year later, in 2018, he did a second study. The same cohort showed an increase in the symptoms of ADHD associated strongly with the level of fluoride in the mother's urine. And on August the 19th, just how many days from now? About 10 days from now.
Right.
There's a publication coming out done in Canada, which has reproduced the same findings as Mexico City. This is going to be published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, Pediatrics. I guess they have several magazines, and Pediatrics, JAMA. High profile medical study. So this could be the end of fluoridation right there. Once this is in the hands now, JAMA, this is now in the hands of practically every doctor, every pediatrician in the United States. I don't see how they can ignore this issue any longer.
Especially if they read it, right?
Yeah, if they read it. But as I say, these are U.S. government-funded studies. I mean, that's the big breakthrough. Again, a little bit of history. As you know, I've been on this for 24 years. Mm-hmm. Started in 1996. That coincided with the first publication of IQ studies from China, at least in the English literature. In the English literature, 1996 is when we learned there are these studies associating fluoride exposure to young children and lowered IQ. Now, at that time, nobody was saying that the critical period was during fetal development. All we knew is that children growing up in fluoridated communities had lower IQ than children in non-fluoridated, or in the case of China, high natural versus low natural, because they don't fluoridate their water in China.
Right.
And so over the years, now we're over 60 studies, of which at least 50, 55 or 56 show this relationship. But again, always they've said, oh, those are studies from China. Those are studies from India. They have high. Yeah. They've had excuses for ignoring all these Chinese, Indian, Iranian, and Mexican studies. There are studies done in these 4 different countries, but the consistency is incredible. Over 21 years in China, there was a review of this done by Harvard in 2012. 27 studies. 26 of the studies showed a lowered IQ in the high fluoride village versus the low fluoride. Wow. 26 out of 27, even though those studies, Richard, were done over a period of 21 years in 2 different countries, in this case, the Harvard review, China and Iran, and very, very different geographical areas in China, and done by different research teams. And what a consistency. 27 studies over 21 years, different research teams in different geographical locations, but all coming up with the same conclusion that children exposed to higher levels of fluoride had lowered IQ. As I said, poo-pooed by the promoters of fluoridation for 20 years, but now we have studies financed by the National Institute of Health, the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences are finding these same results in Mexico City, in Canada, and I think it will soon in other countries as well.
So in a place like China, if they find that out and they find it's destroying the health, assuming that they wanted the people to be healthy, which is a whole other issue, what would they do? Start putting in municipal water filters that took out fluoride?
Oh, yeah. Good question. Yes, you have these endemic areas for fluorosis in China. Literally millions of people in China and India have had their health compromised by fluoride. I mentioned dental fluorosis and skeletal fluorosis.
Right.
And what they do in the villages I visited back in 2006, I think it was, the villages I visited, it was just a question of digging a deeper well. Most of the fluoride in the villages I was at was located in the upper layers of the soil. So if you had a shallow pump, then you get high fluoride levels. But if you just drill down, bore down, then you get the water from the lowered levels. And that was the simplest way to correct the problem for many villages. But
so you'd have to have a good casing going down to the water level, right? So
yeah. But in other villages, they have systems. They have bone char. They use bone char in some places because that's an it absorbs fluoride, right. Bone char, and various low-cost chemicals they've used in India and China to remove the fluoride. Now, the difference between China and India and America on fluoride research is that India and China do not have a deliberate fluoridation program to defend. They are trying to protect their public from natural fluoride. Okay. So there's no politics operating to suppress the information or just not finance the research. So the really good news, I think, is that the National Institute of Health is now funding good, solid studies. It will no longer be a question of, that you can't trust those studies. Now they're doing solid studies. And it also means that researchers are no longer inhibited by what has happened to people in the past. For example, Dr. Phyllis Mullinex was the head of the chairman of the toxicology department at Forsyth Dental Center. She also had an appointment at the Children's Hospital there. Okay. And she found in 1995, that animals, rats, exposed to fluoride before they were born were hyperactive, and rats exposed to fluoride after they were born were hypoactive. And it caused quite a furor. She was called down to Washington, and she was actually asked. People say, do you realize what you're saying? You're saying that fluoride may be lowering the IQ of children. And she said, yes, that may be what I'm saying. And at that point, this is in the 1990s, early 1990s, she thought she was going to get a lot of money for research because they seemed so concerned about it. But they weren't concerned about what she was finding. They were concerned about stopping her doing the work. They fired her. Forsyth Dental Center fired her and told her that her work was no longer relevant to dentistry. Wow. You can imagine the shockwaves that went through scientific research centers, circles, when they found out that somebody that produced this landmark study was fired. And then similarly in the EPA, William Marcus, who was the chief toxicologist of the water division of the EPA, he responded to a study on cancer in animals, a cancer study, and he was appalled that people were downgrading the cancers when they shouldn't be. He blew the whistle on this, and they fired him too. They fired this really competent toxicologist because he was waving red flags on fluoride's toxicity, which interfered with this great public health program. One of the great public health achievements of the 20th century, according to two people at the Center of Disease Control. And that's quoted every day somewhere.
So what do you think is going on there? Why do the people fire him when most likely they would know that he's doing legitimate research? What's going on?
What's going on is people protecting their reputations, protecting their rear ends, protecting their gravy train. You also have to understand, during that period when fluoridation, the idea of adding fluoride to the drinking water was first discussed in about 1945, and then they started the trials in 1950. In that period is when they established the National Institute of Dental Research. And basically what that did, a huge building in Bethesda, Maryland, along with the National Institute of Health, it put dentistry, dental research on the same level as any other research into any other organ. It established dentistry as a part of medicine, as opposed to going a plumber. It established their reputation. So a huge amount of dental research was propagated on the backs of fluoridation. It became literally the gravy train, and still is today. But the one thing you have to do, if you're going to get money from the National Institute of Dental Research to do research on fluoride, you have to say in the first paragraph that it's a terrific for teeth. Swallowing fluoride is terrific dental health. It's like a ticket of entry.
So that's the one therapy that got dentistry credibility.
Credibility and
allowed it to become part of medicine.
Yeah, and also public health. The people in dentistry are very proud of fluoridation. It's their contribution to public health. The people in public health are very proud of this intervention. And unfortunately, the very aspects of their pride are the very aspects which says you shouldn't have done it in the first place. Because if you put a toxic substance into the drinking water, it goes to everybody. And for them, that's a boon.
Right.
It goes to everybody. It means you don't have to educate anybody about avoiding sugar, about good diet, about good dental hygiene. Just shove this pixie dust in the drinking water and everybody is looked after. And they also believe that this is going to be a benefit for poor kids. Poor kids badly served by this country. 80% of dentists in this country will not treat children on Medicaid because the returns are so
right.
low.
So what they're connecting it to economic disadvantage.
Yes.
Probably racial disadvantage.
Yes.
And they're talking about equal access.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
Which is a popular buzzword in government agencies. Yeah. Even if it's equal access to something that will hurt or kill you, the important thing is the equal access.
Yeah. Well, of course, whether or not the kids are actually drinking water instead of soda is a big question. But the real concern here is the last children who need to have an impact on their mental development, lowering of IQ, ADHD, are children in low-income families.
Yeah, because they're already not getting very good food, probably.
That's right. The very people that you would want to help are going to be hurt most.
And you mentioned sodas, but if sodas are made commercially, they have plenty of fluoride in them, right? They get the same fluoride that's in the water.
That's right. If you make a soda in a fluoridated community, you'll certainly have the fluoride in there. And then same with fruit juice. If you dilute the concentrate with local water, it's going to be probably fluoridated.
Yeah. So there's some kind of a defect in, I mean, I know this is getting out of the realm of conventional science, but there's some kind of a defect in the consciousness and ethics of the people involved willing to protect something psychologically, and it's irrelevant what it does to people. It's just that they get onto what they have to protect.
Yes, indeed. But there's only a few players in this. This is the thing that's so striking to me. You can count almost on the fingers of one hand the individuals that are actually calling these shots. I mean, we have huge bureaucracies, right? You have the American Dental Association, you have the Center of Disease Control, and the whole chain of command on health and public health, from the Center of Disease Control through state health departments, down to local health boards, down to your local doctor. If you're in one of those bureaucracies, you learn very quickly you don't challenge policy. Right. Your job is to promote policy, not to question it. So this, even though you've got a vast network of people, it's only people at the top who are normally political appointments with a huge salary to protect, who can change this cumbersome machine to turn it around. And it's just incredibly difficult. And then in between, all those people that are carrying out policy are basically handled like a public relations machine. They are fed the lines. There are public relations outfits which work on the glossy brochures and the messaging and so on. And
right.
And that's where the, not immorality, but the amorality comes in, the lack of moral questioning. Because if your job is a public, you know what your job is. Your job is to promote something. So you promote it. And what you do, and this is the same for politicians, often the public relations outfit is a screen for the individual. It's the other people that are carrying out the mechanics of promotion. You just put your name to it at the last moment. That's it.
Right.
All the work done for you.
Yeah, good point. So in a way, it's all an advertising agency.
Yeah. And then the way I have summed this up is that when policy is king, science becomes a slave. Right,
or is killed.
Yeah, science has to fit into policy for the people that are running the show. For the people that are running the show, so if the science says it works, then that science is what everybody is fed. And that's what makes it into the mainstream media. If science says it doesn't work and it's dangerous, then that science is ignored and doesn't end up in the mainstream media, and people don't learn about it. By the way, you've got a way of testing this, Richard. Today, a report was published. Let me just get you the exact details. A report was published today from Mount Sinai, which showed a relationship between exposure of adolescents, teenagers, and liver and kidney damage. Okay, here's the title. Fluoride may diminish kidney and liver function in adolescents, study suggests. And this is from Mount Sinai researchers. It was published in Environmental International. It was published today. Now, for those who are listening to this, start looking at your papers to see if you see any mention in the New York Times, Washington Post about this study that may be affecting your children if they're teenagers, kidney function, liver function. And meanwhile, of course, we have this far more serious concern about the damage to the brain. Certainly not many people are being told about that.
Yeah, pretty interesting. And what about these dentists that I've talked to that say, well, maybe there's some, question if it's not that great to be drinking it, but everybody knows that putting it on your teeth topically, even though your teeth are in your mouth, that putting it on your teeth topically, everybody universally agrees that that's great, and we should always do that.
We have in the Fluoride Action Network, we have a whole spectrum of attitudes to that. For my money, if I was given the choice between a program which emphasized the use of fluoridated toothpaste, especially with careful supervision in young children like the Child Smile program in Scotland, I would much prefer that the topical treatment is far more rational. I mean, even the other side, even the Center for Disease Control admits that the major benefit of fluoride is topical, not systemic. So once you've admitted that, they admitted that in 1999. If the major benefit is topical, why don't you simply brush it on your teeth and spit it out? Not drink it with every glass of water, cup of coffee that you drink. I mean, it just defies rationality that once they had concluded that they were wrong about the benefits, systemic benefits from swallowing fluoride, that they should have stopped the practice right then and put the emphasis on promoting topical treatment.
Right, but I guess what I'm bringing up is real science, the one that was killed and the other one brought in its place, memorization of propaganda. Yeah. Real science, back when that was around, questions everything, no matter how obvious it seems. So the background and credentials of the people that said it was great to drink are not that good because it was terrible. So why should we believe that they're right, that it's good topically?
Well, there is some science here. There is some science. There have been not one single randomized clinical trial to demonstrate the effectiveness of swallowing fluoride, which can easily be done in terms you could use.
Sure.
You either have a placebo or you get a fluoride tablet. You could see if ingestion.
Or even retroactively.
Yeah.
Between communities that had it and didn't.
Yeah. Well, that's more difficult. But there have been 70 randomized clinical trials which demonstrate that fluoridated toothpaste actually does reduce tooth decay.
Okay, so if you could do that and have it not be swallowed.
Yeah, and that is a big if, because young children do not have a good swallowing reflex. So you'd have to try to restrict this to children over 6 years of age when the swallowing reflex really kicks in. But they need parental supervision to make sure they don't swallow too much.
Right.
But the key message is, for tooth decay, you need a better diet, and you need good dental hygiene, and you need early intervention if things go wrong. And the trouble with poor families is they don't get the early intervention, and their diet is poor, and the parents are often so busy putting food on the table that they don't have time to supervise, educate children well enough in the dental hygiene. But brushing your teeth, they say fluoridation is one of the top public health achievements of the 20th century. Right. One of the top dental achievements of the 20th century is the toothbrush. But not enough children are taught how to use the toothbrush and do it properly. Yeah. And there are a lot of people that believe that you don't even need fluoridated toothpaste. You just need a toothbrush and some form of toothpaste. Salt and not salt. Sodium bicarbonate,
baking soda,
coconut oil. I'm told makes a very good toothpaste.
Yeah. The reason I question putting it on topically is sometimes the parameters that the study is looking for don't include other things that are negative. And with something that's basically intrinsically toxic and saying that that's a really good treatment, it just makes me want to be cautious, because what if it takes them 20 years to discover it's doing some other terrible thing, and you could get the same benefit without the fluoride with better food?
Well, we are finding those harmful effects after 20 years, which we didn't suspect 70 years ago. We are getting those effects. Yeah, and I mean, all I can say is from my own life, since 1996, I haven't used fluoridated toothpaste.
Yeah, exactly.
Since 1996. And if I had children now, I certainly would not be encouraging them to use fluoridated toothpaste. But people differ on that. They think the slight benefits outweigh the risks, and especially if you have parental supervision. In Scotland, they have this very successful Child Smile program, which has produced better teeth in Scotland than currently in New Zealand, which has a lot of fluoridation. The children are taught to brush their teeth together in class, all together. So there's kind of rich. There are the toothbrushes, there's the toothpaste, and they all together get the brushes. And in consort, they all brush their teeth and spit it and so on. And also, another thing, they're getting healthy snacks in schools.
Wow, that's amazing.
In Scotland, it's very advanced. They see dental health as part of total health, and if they do the right things to protect the teeth, they're doing the right things to protect the body. Too much sugar gives you obesity, and then diabetes risk and so on. So if you get that sugar right, you've got a good start. And get the minerals from the fresh vegetables. And the other thing which is so good with the Child Smile program is they involve the parents very early on.
Good.
And this is why the program is so cost effective, because the most expensive thing for treating children under 5 is extracting teeth under anesthetics. And the main cause for extraction of children's first teeth, primary teeth, under anesthetics is a condition called baby bottle tooth decay. And this occurs when a baby sucks on a bottle formula, either milk or sugared water, fruit juice, even Coca-Cola. When they suck on it, when parents use this as a pacifier and the kid goes to sleep with this in its mouth, what happens is the top teeth rot to the gum. Whereas the bottom teeth are hardly touched because the tongue is actually protecting the teeth, the bottom teeth. So you see the top teeth absolutely ravaged. So it's easy to tell when a kid has baby bottle tooth decay. Okay, so the end result, if you have early access to parents, you can warn them about avoiding baby bottle tooth decay. And that literally saves millions of dollars for these programs.
And maybe not give your kids bottles of soft drinks. That might be a good idea too.
Yeah, absolutely. All of these things are all part of the picture, and all starting in 1949 when the sugar lobby said we need to find a way to reduce tooth decay without reducing sugar consumption, and saw fluoride magic bullet. It's not a magic bullet. And fluoride, by the way, does not treat baby bottle tooth decay. The rates of baby bottle tooth decay are the same in fluoridated and non-fluoridated communities. Where you see a difference is between high income and low income. You'll find much higher rates of baby bottle tooth decay in low income areas compared to high income areas.
So when you were first finding out that the conspiracy theorist people were not that crazy and this was a real issue that was important, did you think that everybody was going to be really happy that you discovered it and you could just let them know and they'd change it? Or did you go and try to explain it, or what happened?
Well, I gave talks all over the place and have done for 24 years now. I remember the very afternoon that my wife put those papers on my desk. And the reason she did that is that evening they were having a meeting at the local village of Canton, and they were deciding whether to continue fluoridation or not. And she wanted me to read this stuff so I could give her solid advice, scientific advice, whether she should say continue or stop.
Okay.
And after reading the papers that she gave me, walking to the village council, I remember saying to Ellen, I said, this one is going to be easy. Remember, I've been fighting incinerators and dioxins, all that kind of stuff. And this to me was so obvious that this was a stupid thing to do. Because you can't control the dose, you can't control who it goes to. You know, if you've got a toxic substance, some people are going to get harmed because of that normal distribution. A human being's response to a toxic substance or a pharmaceutically active substance follows that normal distribution curve. It means most people will have an average response. A few people will be at the one end of the tail end, will have a very resistant to that toxic substance. But over at this end, there'll be a small percentage of people, 1 or 2%, who will be very, very vulnerable to this toxic. They'll be super sensitive to the toxic. Totally predictable. That is what you would expect. And yet, even though we have around the world thousands of people who complain of being very sensitive to fluoride, who get symptoms which reverse when they stop exposure to fluoride and come back when it's all over, convince themselves that they're sensitive to fluoride. No government in the limited fluoridated world has ever sought to put that on a scientific basis. Even when citizens have been willing to be part of double-blind studies to test this out, that they're sensitive to fluoride, no government has yet attempted to put this on a serious scientific level. And to me, this is so utterly irresponsible, because I want to say to them, for God's sake, this is not my policy. It's not citizens' policy. This is your policy. Mr. and Mrs. Government, this is your policy. You're doing it to us, even though many of us who read the literature don't want you to do it to us. And when people complain that this policy is hurting them, you don't have the decency or the scientific integrity to actually go and investigate it. I think it's disgusting. And we're talking now 70 years in New Zealand, in Australia, in Ireland, in Israel, in England, in Canada, in the United States, in Malaysia. Not one of those countries has investigated try to put on a scientific level where the people that claim to be sensitive to fluoride actually are sensitive to fluoride.
And what do you think is the reason?
They don't want to find a problem. If you don't look, you don't find.
Yeah.
It's easier for them to say, hey, we've been doing this for 70 years and we don't find any problem.
Right.
You say, well, what studies have you done? Oh, well, we haven't done any studies. You know, this is funny. This happened in Canada, and I was at the meeting in Dryden, Ontario, I think it was about 2008. The chief dental officer of Canada, who's very pro-fluoridation, and I challenged him to a debate. Well, he didn't debate me in Dryden, Ontario, but he did show up the day before to give a talk. And I was there. And the talk was videotaped. So what I'm about to tell you did actually happen. He said during the debate, he says, I walked down your high street today and I didn't see anybody growing horns. And you've been fluoridated for 40 years. For 40 years. So that gives you an indication of the sophistication of the research program in Canada on the health effects of fluoride. They walk up and down streets looking for people who's growing horns, goat horns or moose horns or deer horns, bull horn. I mean, that is such a pathetic response, but it's typical of what they've been saying for 70 years. If you don't look, you don't find. The absence of study is not the same as the absence of harm, but they've always assumed that the absence of study is the absence of harm.
Okay, so you know that some of the people who are defending this the most vehemently, there might possibly be some kind of a financial aspect to it, right? So have you looked into what happens with cities and the finances of the fluoride business?
Well, there are financial interests, and unfortunately, I don't know which one is the supreme one. Obviously, the phosphate fertilizer industry, you know, we don't use pharmaceutical grade fluoride to fluoridate the public water. We use the waste product of the phosphate fertilizer industry. Right.
It's much more efficient. I mean, you can get a better price and you get rid of a toxic waste at the same time, right? So it's environmental.
It's much cheaper than pharmaceutical grade, so yes, you can get rid of it. Right. So the phosphate fertilizer industry is saving and making between $100 and $200 million a year instead of paying to get rid of fluoride as a hazardous waste from its processing of phosphate rock. It is actually public water supply. It's actually buying it from them. So they instead of going to a red ticket item, they're black ticket item. So they've obviously got a stake in this. I don't think it's the tail that wags the dog. There are people whose reputations and careers depend upon promoting fluoridation. They'll be out of a job if they didn't. If you take the typical medical officers of health in Canada, for example, they pull down a salary of between $200,000 and $300,000 a year. And the moment that one of them got on a public platform and said that fluoridation was a bad idea, they'll be out of work. Right. So they keep their jobs. You get along by going along. You promote policy. You don't oppose policy, and you have a happier life and a wealthier life. So that's part of it. You've got all the industries that use fluoride, all the dental products, the flosses, the toothpicks, the toothpaste, the mouthwashes. All of those people are making a lot of money out of fluoride, and they wouldn't make that money if fluoride got a bad name all of a sudden. Yeah. But also, they're worried about the lawsuits. And if people can prove that they've been damaged, as all these new studies come out in terms of liver damage, the kidney damage, brain damage, tooth damage, bone damage, you know, the lawsuits could make the tobacco look like a picnic. Yeah. So I think the way I see it working is that the Center of Disease Control offers cover to the American Dental Association. Right. And the American Dental Association, in turn, offers cover to the fluoride dental people. They're all being protected by, it's just like Solzhenitsyn's novel, first circle, it's all, you're all responding to the person immediately above you, and that person's responding to the person immediately above you.
Right.
So you
just say what you're told and keep your money intact.
That's right. As long as the Center of Disease Control is pouring out this garbage, like fluoridation is one of the top 10 public health achievements of the 20th century. It makes it easier for the American Dental Association and easier for the dental manufacturers. Someone has to blow the whistle.
It's interesting that you mentioned the ADA, the American Dental Association, because weren't they actually started to protect the use of mercury in amalgam fillings?
Absolutely correct, Richard. Absolutely correct. If you go back to the 1830s, you had in America the amalgam wars. And that was a war between two groups of dentists. One group of dentists favored gold fillings, and the other group of dentists favored these mercury amalgams, which were much cheaper.
Yeah.
And the group that favored mercury amalgams eventually morphed into the American Dental Association. And then they have been promoting for the safety of mercury amalgams. They call them silver fillings, but they're mercury since the late 19th century. And they use the same rhetoric and the same devices, the same PR devices, defending mercury amalgams to defending fluoridation.
Right. So they had the background and the experience to do a good job with defending fluoride, it sounds like.
Yeah. They knew just how to go about it. And we have a breakaway group of dentists called the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology, and a few other biological dentists who first opposed mercury amalgams, and now more and more they're opposing the use of fluoride, certainly in drinking water and also in dentistry. So look for a holistic dentist who doesn't use the mercury or fluoride, and you'll be better off for yourself and particularly for your children.
So how did the Fluoride Action Network start? What part of the history was that?
Well, when I did eventually get involved in '96 at the request of my wife, the first thing we did is to look around and get in contact with all the groups and individuals that we could find that were fighting fluoridation. And it became clear to us that when a group became focused, they could beat fluoridation, and this was happening. But what wasn't happening is that groups weren't helping each other. And we had come from a group called Work on Waste USA, in which we formed a big network of communities fighting incinerators. Right. And we saw how communities helped other communities to stop incineration. Even when they lost, they would still continue to help other communities. There's an amazing generosity amongst the grassroots activists. And so we thought, let's do the same with fluoridation. Let's get the groups in America, in Canada, in Australia, in New Zealand, in England, in Ireland, in Israel. And so let's get these groups working together. Let's form a network. So we learn from each other. We benefit from each other's victories, and we commiserate with each other's losses, but we help each other. So that was the Fluoride Action Network. We got a lot of professionals to put their name to it, and that was good. And then...
When did that start? What year was that?
2000, officially in 2000, because that's when my youngest son came to us and said, Mom and Dad, I'd like to help you with fluoridation. We nearly fell off our chairs. We'd always hoped that one of our kids would grow up and become an activist, but we never grasped the notion that one of them would not only become an activist, but would be better than us at every level. Even though we had a lot of experience being activists, he is a better writer, he's a better researcher, he's certainly a better lawyer than and we're not lawyers. So he took over. I said, what do you want to do? He says, I'll do the webpage. So he developed a webpage. He developed the world's largest health database on fluoride. You can go to it. If you go to our webpage, fluoridealert.org, go to the top right-hand corner and click on researchers, you will see a big menu. And part of that menu is a health database by tissue. So you can look up fluoride in teeth, fluoride in bone, fluoride in kidney, fluoride in liver, fluoride in the brain, and so on. huge health database. Then in 2008, he left us to go and become a lawyer. He trained as a lawyer, and then a few years later, after qualifying, getting his degree, clerking for a couple of federal law judges, he then joined a tort firm in Los Angeles. And now, run the clock forward, he has come up with the lawsuit which should end fluoridation once and for all. And quite frankly, it's brilliant. And just to run the clock forward, this lawsuit will start in San Francisco on February the 3rd, 2020. It will last for 2 weeks. And if science can get a foothold here as opposed to politics, we should win that. It should be the end of fluoridation worldwide. Now, this is how it came about. He saw that under TSCA, the Toxic Substances and Control Act, the EPA has the right and obligation to protect the public from toxic substances. And if they find that a toxic substance poses, used in commerce or in any way, poses a risk to the general population or even subsets of the population, they have the right, the power to ban that substance, ban the use of that substance. So my son put in a lawsuit calling for the EPA to ban the deliberate addition of fluoride to the drinking water. Didn't touch naturally occurring fluoride. That's neither here nor there. He says you cannot deliberately add fluoride to the drinking water because of its neurotoxicity. And to win this lawsuit, we need to do three things. We need to show that fluoride is a neurotoxic hazard, that neurotoxic does cause neurotoxicity. And we got over 300 studies to do that, animal and human, no problem. The second thing, has to show it's a risk at the levels at which people are being exposed to drinking fluoridated water and other sources of fluoride. And we can do that now with these studies from Mexico City and Canada. And thirdly, you have to show that it's unreasonable risk. And it's unreasonable because there are safer and more appropriate alternatives, namely topical treatments, if you want fluoride.
Right. So again, the basis of what allows this lawsuit to happen is showing that the EPA has the jurisdiction to ban a substance under, tell me the condition again.
Toxic Substance and Control Act, TSCA. It's an article there which gives them the right to ban a substance which they find in common use can cause harm.
Okay, but how do you bridge the difference between their right to ban something and actually making them do it?
A federal lawsuit. That's what it is.
And the lawsuit is asking for that, right?
Yeah,
as a result,
it's
asking for the judge to say they have to ban it.
Yeah. What happened was, you start with a petition. So under this TSCA, you put in a petition. Any citizen can do it. Any group can do it. We were one of the first to do it. You put in a petition, and then the EPA, I think, has 90 days to respond to that petition. And they could have responded in two ways. They could have rejected our petition on its merits, or they could have rejected our petition on jurisdictional grounds and shunted it over to the water department, which would have been the kiss of death for us, because the water department is hand in hand with the National Institute of Health, which is pro-fluoridation. But they didn't. They rejected our petition on its scientific merits. They were saying the evidence that fluoride is neurotoxic and lowers IQ in children is very weak and not relevant to American populations. And so we engaged. Then that allowed us, once they rejected our petition, to sue them under TSCA, to force it into federal court. And then the next thing, the EPA tried to chuck the lawsuit out, and the judge ruled that they couldn't. It was a valid case. So beauty now, Richard. I mean, salivate on this one. Number one, my son knows a hell of a lot about this literature, and he's going to be the lawyer. But number two, often in lawsuits involving regulatory agencies, whether it's the FDA, EPA, CDC, or somebody, they will claim authority. they will say, look, we've been appointed by the federal government to protect the environment or protect health. And we say, as we are the experts, that this fluoride is perfectly safe and effective. No problem. And we're in charge, so get lost. I mean, that's normally how they got away with it for 70 years.
Right.
But in this case, as the lawsuit is engaged on whether the science shows that fluoride is neurotoxic or not, whether it poses a hazard, a risk, and whether that risk is a reasonable risk, is a matter of science. And the judge will rule on the science, hearing both sides, and the authority of the EPA does not come into it. It's going to be the authority of the science. Whose experts are most persuasive to the judge, the court, in which studies are the most relevant, the most powerful, the most acceptable, etc., etc., etc.
Right.
We think we've got the stronger case.
So the judge is going to read through all those studies, hopefully understand them, and then
he's going to hear. He's going to hear from both sides. I mean, each lawyer will present expert witnesses to support the arguments on both sides. And we've got we've raised a lot of money from citizens. We've got a very, very strong suite of experts. We got some of the best in the business, really, on our side.
Sounds pretty hopeful.
Oh, it is. It is. I think this is our single best shot of beating fluoridation in 70-odd years. And the turning point was that our petition went in 2016, but we had no idea that our case would the strength of our case would be magnified by a factor of 10 within a few months by this study coming out of Mexico City by BASHASH, this U.S. government-funded study.
Wow.
And these studies are being funded by the very agencies which promote fluoridation. So
that's very strange that they made such a huge mistake.
Well, it's just quite possible that what happened, I mean, as I told you, this Mexican city is 12 years old. And it's just possible that 12 years ago was when the National Research Council did a thorough review of the toxicology of fluoride in water, ostensibly to look at the safe drinking water standards for fluoride.
Yeah.
And it was then that they revealed there was a tremendous amount of research that should be done had not been done. So that was you need more research. They said, we're amazed that so many basic questions have not been answered. And one of them was neurotoxicity.
Right.
So it must have been about that time that the NIH and particularly the NIEHS, the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, very important agency, started to fund these studies. And it may have been to show that we were wrong. Maybe the Chinese studies have been around for, by that time, 2006, by about 16 years. The Chinese study has been studied about 1991. So they may have had the attitude, we should finance this studies in the Western population to prove once and for all that these Chinese and Indian studies are crap. That may have been the motivation. I'm not sure. That may have been the motivation of the NIH and the EPA. Maybe the motivation of the NIEHS was curiosity. They really were interested to find out, because by that time there were a lot of animal studies. And as I said, the consistency on the human studies was very striking.
Wow. So if that is successful, and you're saying the trial would only take 2 weeks, right? Then that could, what would the steps be that would happen if the judge says yes?
Yeah, if the judge says you have to, they'll do the usual things, like they will plead their side will plead for more research. It's not absolutely concrete. It's not proved beyond a shadow of a doubt, because that brings in the precautionary principle.
Right.
They will argue we need more research, more time. What we have to argue is you can have as much time as you want.
As long as you don't do any fluoridating until you're sure, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
We say we want a moratorium on fluoridation until you've done that research. Now take your time. But a moratorium is the only, in my view, conscionable way forward. I would like an outright ban tomorrow.
Actually, that should apply to every toxic substance that the government's allowing to be put on everybody. Right? Yeah. Just do 1,000 years of research. It's fine. Yeah. Just don't be poisoning people while you're doing it.
That's exactly.
Wow.
In this case, we've got such a wealth of evidence which shows that research needed to be done 70 years ago. It certainly needs to be done now. And our evidence is strong enough to say, and because basically if they continue now, they're admitting it's an experiment. If the moment the words out of their mouth saying we need more research, okay, you need more research. Who are you doing that research on? You're doing that research on my babies, on my children, on my elderly bones. How dare you? How dare you can't do that? The New York Convention says you can't do that.
Yeah, and it's interesting. There are laws on the books in the U.S. that say you absolutely cannot do potentially deadly and poisonous experiments on the people unless it's for scientific research purposes or, a number of list of other exceptions like that. But it goes against the Geneva Convention and informed consent principles and all that.
It isn't enough to have scientific research. You can do it for scientific research if you have informed consent.
Yeah, well, I mean, forget it. They haven't had informed consent on anything because what's in the enclosed literature, and that comes in the packages of some of these things, would be deadly to show to the people involved. They would never agree to any of it. Yeah.
Well, there is informed consent. There's informed consent when any doctor gives you a prescription. That the social bargain there, the social contract, is that doctor is meant to tell you what the side effects are, tell you what the benefits are, and you are the one that's supposed to make the decision whether you take that drug or not. And what water fluoridation has done, it's allowed city governments and sometimes state governments to do to everyone what an individual doctor can do to no one. An individual doctor cannot force you to take medication. What we're allowing governments to do is to force everybody to take.
Well, yeah, but I mean, in actual practice, doctors almost never tell the patient everything it's going to do to them.
Yeah, but they could be in serious
They're supposed to.
Yeah, no, they're supposed to. And there's another thing called the Hippocratic Oath, which says first do no harm.
Yeah, I think they're getting rid of that. I mean, lately, but it's kind of outdated. But
poor old Hippocrates, he was right.
Yeah, but I learned in elementary school that prior to 1950, nobody really knew anything. It was all superstition, and that science was after that. So, what is the work of Fluoride Action Network now, and what would it become if there's a favorable ruling in this case?
Well, our work is education, education, education. We have a firm belief if scientists and the citizens knew the truth about the dangers of fluoride, it would fall under its own weight. Right. But we have to get that education out in the face of arrogant regulatory officials who are not doing their job, in the face of journalists who are not doing their job, newspapers and mass media that are not doing their job. It's very difficult. It's very, very difficult. Even though we have a wonderful, loyal bunch of supporters, we have about 80,000 people involved in supporting us, and it's still incredibly difficult. And social media has helped to level the playing field. internet has made so much more science readily available to people than certainly when we got involved. When we got involved, we were still going to libraries and making Xerox copies of and sending them out to people. Today, it's a click of a button. So that is changing, but it's very, very, and you can't blame people. If the newspapers do not cover the story, the story came out today, you can't blame the people. You have to blame the regulatory officials and the media for not warning. I mean, it goes back to the thing that really, Rick, gets me so hot under the collar, is why aren't people warning pregnant women? I mean, every time you see an advertisement on television for any kind of drug, you get a whole list of symptoms and warnings, and they're required to do it. But people are not warning pregnant women that the water they're drinking every bloody day may be damaging the brains of their baby in the womb.
Right.
That's disgusting. I mean, even if they just, put a whole bunch of caveats on it, it's not absolutely certain, but there are studies which indicate a potential risk to your brain, and to be on the safe side, avoid fluoridated water during pregnancy.
Right. Wasn't there also some famous, one or more famous Harvard studies that people like to point to that linked lowering of IQ by, 8 or 10 points to fluoridated water?
Well, that goes back to 2012. That was a review, and I've actually mentioned this study already. That was a review in 2012 by Choi and al., including Philippe Grandjean, who was one of the world's experts on mercury neurotoxicity. Mm-hmm. And that's the one who did the 27 studies. It was a meta-analysis of 27 IQ studies, 25 from China, 2 from Iran, and all but 1 found a lowered IQ in the children in the high fluoride village versus the low fluoride village. And in most of them, the source of fluoride was in the water. In some of them, the fluoride was from coal burning. But I think it was about 20 studies which was on water fluoridation.
When you're trying to get these points across to people about IQ, do you think most people really have an idea what the loss of several points of IQ means? I mean, in everyday life, how would you explain that to them, what the difference is?
Well, it's very, very important, and really it hovers over the real central problem of medicating everybody, the central problem of exposing the whole population to a toxic substance. And it's the difference between the impact on the individual, which may or may not be serious, and the individual on the population. Now, let me explain it this way. If you had a shift of 5 downwards in the whole population,
right,
the average IQ would go from 100 to 95.
Okay.
And the mothers and school teachers will probably not notice the difference between a child with an IQ of 100 and with one with 95. You wouldn't notice it.
Okay.
But here's the problem. If you shifted the whole population down by 5 IQ points, and we are exposing the whole population, then the two tails are what is impacted. The fraction of children with an IQ over 130, that means the very bright ones, including the geniuses, you'd halve that. You'd halve the number of very bright children in your society. And if you look at the children with an IQ less than 70, officially mentally handicapped, they would go up by over 50%. So the economic and social ramifications of that kind of shift on IQ, and there's nothing controversial about that. It's just simply, that's mathematics applied to an exponential curve.
Okay.
No question about what I've just said, and everybody that knows anything about IQ knows that fact. It's very, very central to this concern. And of course, we think we did that when we had lead in gasoline.
Yeah.
We think that when we had lead in gasoline, we shifted the IQ down by 5 IQ points.
Okay. Okay, interesting. So at this point, with the educational work you're doing, regardless of the outcome of the trial, I would assume that if the judge gives you a favorable outcome, there could still be an appeal from the other side, right?
Oh, yes. Yeah, they'll drag it out.
It's going to take a while. because there's so much money and other things motivating the continuation of it. They're not going to just say, okay, we give up.
No, I don't think they're going to say that. The dental lobby is not going to give up. That's for sure. But I tell you, there is some good news, and very few people listening to this program would have heard this very interesting fact. And I may be overly optimistic here, but let me explain something that happened just a few weeks ago. And it happened in Calgary. Calgary was our biggest victory since our book was published in 2010. One of the authors, James Beck, an MD, PhD, was a professor at the University of Calgary. And he and his friends and colleagues were able to use the book and his own persuasion to stop fluoridation in Calgary. That was in 2011. And that was 1.2 million people liberated. Well, run the clock forward, and they're trying to refluoridate Calgary based upon a very wonky study which claims that tooth decay went up when Calgary stopped fluoridation. It's not true, but they have a study which they point to, but it's been critiqued and it's been published. The critique has been published, but never mind. So the issue has been engaged again, and one of the things that the council did was to ask the O'Brien Institute at the University of Calgary to do a review of the. Well, everybody knew that the O'Brien Institute was very pro-fluoridation. So it was assumed that they would come back with a rubber stamp for fluoridation.
All right.
Well, I was fortunate enough to go to Calgary a few weeks before they were due to make their study public. And I had a meeting with the director of the O'Brien Institute, and I gave a presentation on neurotoxicity, hitting many of the points I shared with you this afternoon. Mm-hmm. And he listened. He listened.
Wow,
and
that's
his colleagues listened. And my colleagues who were there were telling me afterwards they looked absolutely shocked. And so after the meeting was over, all the language was very polite and supportive, congratulated us on the science, and obviously we weren't crazy people, blah, blah, blah. And did we dare hope that this had turned the chairman, his name is Dr. Ghali, Ghali,
okay.
Have we got him to think about this? Anyway, apparently he went away. He took it seriously. He read the literature. He even phoned up Bashash of the Bashash study and Christine Teal of the Canadian studies that I've mentioned and talked to them in person. He was very impressed that these studies were financed by the National Institute of Health and Environmental Health Sciences. And what happened? They produced a report which did not come down promoting fluoridation. They said, we cannot give you a yes or no answer. All we're going to do is to review the literature. And in the review of the literature, they did a very good job on the neurotoxicity. I mean, I only found a couple of very small things I would argue with. Otherwise, they were absolutely straight, underlining the importance of who had funded these studies, who was doing these studies. These studies were science, and this issue was of concern. And basically, reading between the lines, we shouldn't be fluoridating until this issue has been resolved.
Right.
Now, that was one individual who was turned around by the science, and that gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah.
And a lot of hope in the man's integrity, because it must have been extremely difficult for him being pro-fluoridation, being head of a pro-fluoridation institute, and he was asked to deliver the message, and he didn't deliver it. And instead, he gave people for a lot of... Now, the question is, are there other people out there? Are there other people out there that are not totally wedded to fluoridation, who are scientifically trained, believe in science, who will do the same thing? And if we could get a number of other people, this could be it. And that lawsuit may be part of it. This lawsuit may give other people the opportunity to read the literature.
Wow, it sounds very optimistic.
Well, I'm a born optimist. My wife thinks they're going to screw us, whatever we do.
Well, that'll be their objective, but which side succeeds is up in the air.
Yeah.
So at this point, you could use, I mean, as much more support as possible, right?
We just need more people. Stop rolling your eyes when you hear the word fluoride. Yes.
Right.
And also, please, I know there's so many other issues out there, so many important issues, but this issue is as easy as turning off a tap.
Right.
I mean, no other issue out there like global warming or ozone damage. You name all those big issues out there. None of them can be stopped as easily as fluoridation if we have the political will. And
right.
But the political will, you need a lot of people informed to put the kind of pressure on politicians to get that political will.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost humorous in what you say, how easy it is, because the big challenge is don't dump poison into the water before you drink it. You have to be really brilliant to understand that that's not a good idea. And
the second thing is you have to be really brilliant to come to the conclusion that a child's brains are more important than their teeth, even if it worked. Their brain,
even if it was completely effective, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, maybe they think that they're going to replace them with chips. I know Elon Musk has a new company called Neuralink that's going to put chips in everybody's brains at kiosks in shopping malls.
Oh, my God.
Just like getting your ears pierced, basically. Oh, and he said, don't worry, it's not going to take over your brain for some time. So it shouldn't be a problem.
Munching chips whilst they're putting chips in your brain.
Yeah, to make it all kind of fun, part of the whole
food, brain.
And it makes you really cool. And you could get a different haircut at the same time. So there is a mentality of, that is not guaranteed to have the brilliance required. But like you say, this issue is so straightforward.
Yeah.
Just try not poisoning yourself and it works much better.
Yeah.
But it's not disconnected from all these other issues that you mentioned, because if government agencies and universities and people that are part of the momentum to do things that are self-destructive get stopped or turned by the kind of procedure that you guys are doing right now, why couldn't that be applied to other examples of the same mentality?
Absolutely. And think about it. This is something that we're doing to our cells. And every so often I get a situation where I have time to give two talks. I give a talk against fluoridation or waste management. And then they want me to talk to something else. And I have getting 10 toxics out of our lives. And I can't remember them all right now, but these are some of the things we're doing to ourselves. Get fluoride out of the water. Get mercury out of our mouths and out of vaccines. Maybe we should get aluminium out of vaccines.
For sure, yeah.
Get sugar out of soft drinks. Get aspartame out of soft drinks. Get pesticides and genetically modified organisms out of agriculture. Get PVC out of commerce, because that's the source of dioxin. Get incineration out of waste management. And lastly, get integrity back into science and into the regulatory agencies.
That's all exactly analogous to the whole fluoride issue.
Yeah.
Because if fluoride just represents poison and self-destruction, and you demonstrate that can be changed, that could revolutionize a lot.
Yeah, and that's another thing to remember. If indeed we're able to stop fluoridation after all these years, and after all the pessimism from people that have tried and failed, boy, what an incredible boost to every other movement in the world. If we can end fluoridation, we can end this, that, and the other.
Yeah, I mean, the majority of issues are all the same issue.
Yeah.
Don't do suicidal stuff. Certainly not for other people.
Yeah.
Right. So,
another thing, I really think that one of the big messages is teaching our kids to grow their own food and to nurture food and to compost and reestablish this circle of life, for them to understand the need to nurture these nature's cycles and so on. A lot of things would flow from that. A lot of things. We're eating nutrients from the soil.
Right.
We're making ourselves sick because we're not getting the minerals that we need.
Yeah.
Especially low-income families.
Yeah, in fact, the money issue is important because, farming needs to be redefined as something really healthy and in harmony with nature instead of one of the most dangerous professions you can possibly be in because it's got the worst poisons. And with farming becoming healthy again, it needs to attract people as a way to make their living.
Yeah.
Not on a million acres, but on relatively small, high-quality operation.
Community gardens, especially in low-income areas. I would like to see governments putting a priority on getting good food to low-income families to try to maybe link farms with low-income areas so that they good food.
It would really change cities to be full of community gardens, organic ones.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, neat. Okay, so if people want to support what you're doing and find out more about it and stay in touch with it, what's the best way to do that? Website and channels and other things.
It's Fluoride Alert. That's 2 words, but no, only 1 word. It's fluoride. Remember to spell fluoride, U-O, not O-U. It's not fluoride, it's fluoride. Think of flu, F-L-U.
Yeah, like fluoride.
Yes. And alert, Fluoride Alert, ALERT.org. That's our webpage. And 2 things there. For people who've got a science and have got a lot of time, click on the researchers button. You'll get just an overwhelming wealth of information. If you've got less time, a more palatable way of getting the same information is go to the middle, and there's a thing called Fan TV, and you'll get oodles of video clips, video programs, things we've made ourselves, things that other people have made. So in the comfort of your armchair, you can get some really top-notch videos which explain the issues very clearly. My son has one called 10 Facts on Fluoride. We have one called Professional Perspectives on Water Fluoridation. That's 15 professionals from around the world explaining why fluoridation is a bad idea. 28 minutes. 28 minutes.
Good.
No problem. So there's good information there. And then you've got a revolving masthead of 10 different trending topics, which include a lot of the things which we've discussed, the lawsuit, these IQ studies, the Bashash study, the Calgary things I mentioned.
Okay.
Good stuff. The O'Brien Institute, I mentioned, we got the full report there. And if you go to that, you look at pages 19 to 21, it's the section on neurotoxicity, which remains the most comprehensive, the most accurate summation of fluoride's neurotoxicity done by a pro-fluoridation institute.
Do you guys have a YouTube channel and a Facebook presence and things like that?
Yeah, we're just making sure that we don't get smacked around by Google's, all the machinations that are going on in censoring. I
was going to mention that too, because real health information is targeted for extermination.
Yeah. In fact, the first item, if you go to our webpage, go to the first item, it shows somebody at a typewriter in handcuffs. Nice graphic. And that is all about what we're doing to avoid being censored.
Okay, good. But you are still on the evil platforms, right?
Yes.
Well, Google is just the search, but on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter, things like that.
We're getting alternatives for all of them.
Good, excellent, because there are some good ones coming out.
Yeah.
Are you guys on Brighteon yet?
I don't know. I'm absolutely pathetic on this. Average 2-year-old is what I need to teach me on most of these things.
Make sure your guys know about Brighteon because it's specifically anti-censoring.
Okay.
And they need to be much wider known now.
Okay.
And it's Brighteon, BRIGHTEON.com.
Well, our media director and does all the video work, and is a guy called Jay Sanders out of San Francisco. He's very, very good, and he
probably knows.
Wrote that bulletin, the first item on our homepage.
Okay, sounds great.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess we just need everybody's help and at least stay up to date with what's happening with the lawsuit and all the technical stuff on fluoride, and even if it's just to watch the short video, it'd be worth it. Yeah,
absolutely. Get yourself informed. That's the start. That's the start.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry to keep you so long. I hope you don't mind. I wanted to cover everything that's relevant, and maybe you'd even come back and give us an update of what happens with the lawsuit later on.
Yes.
That would be interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, Paul. I really appreciate it. And hang on, and we'll say goodbye in the break here.
Yeah.
Okay, you guys, there goes Paul Connett, Dr. Paul Connett. I thought it was really important to find out after this many years of his being away what's happening with Fluoride Action Network and with the whole legal situation of getting communities around the U.S. and the world to do something really amazing, which is to stop pouring poison into the drinking water system. I know it's hard for some of the highly educated people to understand that why you have to do that, but I think if they try, they can understand it, that it's better to drink water just as water. And one thing that we forgot to mention in talking with Dr. Connett is that he's got a book out with two other authors. It's been out for a while. It's a really important book. It's called The Case Against Fluoride. Fluoride is Fluoride, The Case Against Fluoride. And the three authors that I've got here are Dr. Paul Connett, Dr. James Beck, and Dr. H. Spedding Micklem, and Spedding is Spedding. So you'll find it easily online. I'm sure it's still available there. And remember, he said that the lawsuit gets started in February. So we'll try to have Dr. Connett back on shortly after that to see what's going on with the lawsuit and appeals and responses of government agencies and things like that. But as he mentioned, there's no need to wait for the big lawsuit to work on getting it out of all private communities, because it literally is as ridiculous to have it in the water system as dumping poison into your water and then drinking it, which really is not a brilliant plan. And so it's like this common sense kind of thing that needs to be brought back, like so many other things in the world right now, but it is possible to do that. Anyway, I really appreciate your taking the time to watch Paul. I think it very dedicated, important, sincere, knowledgeable scientist who has done a tremendous contribution to the world and to everybody's family by working to get rid of fluoride in the water system. Very important work. And remember, too, when we bring up these issues, these are the kind of issues, as Paul mentioned numerous times, that can get you disappeared off major social media platforms. In case that happens, there's two places to write down to remember to stay in touch with our work. One is, of course, lostartsradio.com. And when you go there, I'd suggest right away getting on the mailing list, because if we can't reach you over the normal video channels, we can send out something in, newsletter format, or embed videos in a private newsletter, something like that. We can only do that if we already have your name and email address. Otherwise, we won't know where to send it to. So go to the lostartsradio.com, get on that list as soon as you can. Also, brighteon.com, brighteon.com/channel/lostartsradio is our channel on the new Brighteon platform, which does not censor, and it needs a lot of support, meaning just watch videos there. It's really helpful to Mike, who started that platform. That's how they get funded, because I guess it makes people see the advertising, and then, one out of however many people will buy something at Mike's store that has a lot of good items on it, by the way. He's known as top health expert in the world, one of them. And so, it's good to use his site as much as you can. And then we have a new channel for people that want to help us try to stay in operation. It's called subscribestar.com/lostartsradio. Also watch for regular public free videos that we put out during the week. We've been doing some on aging and some other important subjects, and those are free for everybody as long as we're on those channels. I'm still doing some private one-on-one appointments, and all the money from those appointments goes to the Lost Arts Research Institute to support the work that we're doing. So those are the main things. Let's see if there's anything else I forgot that I wanted to let you guys know about. The Sunday shows are continuing on all the major platforms for the moment. One of the big ones has told us we can't live stream anymore, at least for the last 2 or 3 weeks, but we're still posting the videos as archives or as podcasts up on that platform, so it doesn't mean that we're gone from there yet. And just want to try to give you as much useful, practical information from all these inspiring people as long as we can keep doing that. And I think that's about it. Remember, Planetary Healing Club is still meeting live on a platform that does not get censored. That's a private webinar-based platform once a week. Doug and I are there live in person every week, and it's interactive. It's for people that want to get more deeply into these things in ways that I can't really talk about on public platforms, and have us still be there. So if you're interested in getting into really working on yourself and transforming your life experience and things like that, health issues and any other kind of life issues, we're allowed to talk about those freely on those meetings. The access to that is at planetaryhealingclub.com, and it'd be nice to see you there if you feel like it, but it does involve work on yourself. It's not a spectator thing. Those people who are ready to do that will appreciate it. And otherwise, I guess that's about it. Thanks for being with us. I really appreciate that. And we'll have another inspiring show for you next Sunday with a new guest. Stay in touch, and we'll see you shortly.